The Young and the Restless Spoilers shock. The hospital room was heavy with the sterile hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic that seemed to cling to every corner like a reminder of fragility. For nearly a month, the air in that place had been filled with whispers of uncertainty, prayers spoken into silence, and the quiet fear of a family that refused to give up hope. Noah had been lying there motionless, suspended somewhere between life and death, and Sharon had counted every hour as if each passing minute was a battle she could not afford to lose. Nick, always the one to appear strong, had spent endless nights standing near the window, pretending to watch the city lights while hiding the tremor in his hands. The doctors had said it was a miracle that Noah had survived the crash, but miracles meant little when the world could still shatter at any second. Then, one morning, the faintest movement of his hand, the softest change in the rhythm of his breath, altered everything. His eyelids fluttered open with effort, and in that fragile moment between unconsciousness and awakening, time seemed to collapse. Sharon gasped as if she had just been pulled back from drowning, tears spilling uncontrollably as she realized that her son had found his way back to her. Nick was at her side within seconds, disbelief and relief crashing through him in waves so strong they almost brought him to his knees. For weeks, they had feared the worst. That Noah would never wake up, that the accident had taken more than his body could endure. But the doctors rushed in, checked every pulse, every reflex, every fragment of his awareness, and confirmed what neither parent had dared to hope for too soon: no severe brain damage, no spinal fractures, no permanent loss. The crash that had stolen so much peace had spared the one thing that mattered most, his life. Yet even miracles come with shadows. While Sharon was still gripping Noah's hand, her heart trying to adjust to joy after so much fear, a presence entered the room that shifted the air in an instant. It was Matt. His arrival was not announced, not expected, and not welcome. The soft creak of the door should have been ordinary, but Sharon's body reacted before her mind could even process what she saw. A chill raced down her spine as her eyes locked onto his. There was something ghostly about him, a figure from another time, one that she thought she had left buried in the wreckage of the past. The faint smile he carried, the almost polite tone in his gesture of concern, felt more like an intrusion than kindness. He claimed he had only come to check on Noah's recovery, that he wanted to see for himself that the young man was safe. But Sharon knew better. Matt's presence was never accidental, never harmless. For him to appear here, at this exact moment, when her family was still trembling from trauma, meant something dangerous was unfolding behind the veil of coincidence. She felt her breath tighten, her instincts screaming that if she didn't remove him from that room immediately, something irreversible would happen. Nick turned from the bedside just in time to catch sight of Matt, and in that second the fragile calm that had settled over the room shattered completely. The look in his eyes hardened from confusion to fury in an instant, the kind of fury born from fear and love twisted together. He moved before anyone could stop him, crossing the space with a force that startled even himself. The sound of the monitor's steady beeping seemed to fade as Nick's hands shot out, gripping Matt by the collar and pressing him against the wall with such intensity that the air itself seemed to recoil. It was a raw, instinctive act, not of logic but of pure protection. Weeks of suppressed fear, sleepless nights, and helpless rage at what had happened to his son erupted all at once. In that violent motion, all the emotions he had buried deep within himself found release. His jaw was clenched, his muscles trembling, as he demanded answers, demanded to know why Matt had come, what he wanted, what game he was playing now. Sharon's voice was a distant echo in his mind, a sound blurred by the pulse pounding in his ears. She tried to pull Nick back, her hands shaking, knowing that every move in this moment could spiral out of control. Noah, just barely conscious, looked on with wide, confused eyes. The last thing he remembered before the crash was the blinding flash of headlights, the sound of twisting metal, and then, nothing. Now he was staring at chaos, his mother's face pale with fear, his father's hands wrapped around a man he didn't even expect to see alive, and his mind trying to catch up to a reality that didn't make sense. Matt's eyes never left Noah's. There was something almost deliberate in the way he turned his head, a faint, knowing smirk that made Noah's stomach tighten. It wasn't just surprise or discomfort, it was recognition mixed with dread. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Noah tried to open his mouth, tried to speak, but the words died before they reached his lips. His throat was dry, his mind a fog, but deep down, something told him this was not just a visit, it was a threat disguised as concern. There was history here, a thread of secrets tangled between Matt and his family that no one wanted to confront, yet it was now forcing its way into the open. The doctors rushed back in, trying to calm everyone down, urging Nick to let go before things escalated further. But the damage had already been done. Sharon's tears of relief had turned into tears of fear, and Noah's heart rate spiked on the monitor as the reality of the situation sank in. The accident that had nearly taken his life suddenly felt connected to something larger, darker, and unfinished. He remembered fragments. A phone call before he left that night, a meeting he was never supposed to attend, a familiar voice warning him to keep quiet. Matt's presence now reawakened all of it. The truth was hovering dangerously close to the surface, but chaos silenced him once again. After the confrontation, security escorted Matt out of the room, though he left with a look that promised he'd return. His calm demeanor only deepened the unease. It was as though he had accomplished exactly what he intended by showing up, to remind them that he still held power, that he was not gone. Sharon collapsed into the chair beside Noah's bed, her hands trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. Her mind replayed every decision, every word exchanged with Matt over the years, and a pattern began to form. She knew this wasn't random. He had been waiting for a moment of vulnerability, waiting for them to lower their guard. The accident, Noah's near death, the timing of his reappearance, it all lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. Nick paced across the room, his fury still simmering beneath the surface, but behind the anger was guilt. He couldn't shake the idea that he might have underestimated Matt's obsession, that in trying to protect his family in the past, he had only pushed their enemy into the shadows long enough for him to prepare his next move. The thought that Matt had been watching, waiting, even orchestrating parts of their suffering made his stomach twist. Meanwhile, Noah lay still, the faint rhythm of his breathing uneven. The physical pain of recovery was nothing compared to the confusion in his mind. He remembered flashes from before the crash of Matt's voice, sharp and demanding, and a warning about a secret that could destroy someone he loved. There was something about Sharon, about the past she never fully explained, that seemed to connect to all of this. He wanted to tell them, to warn them, but fear kept him silent. He wasn't sure what was real anymore or who he could trust. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the corridors grew quiet, Sharon stood by the window staring into the darkness. Her reflection looked older, more haunted than she remembered. She thought about all the lies she had told to protect the people she loved, the things she had hidden about Matt, the reasons she had never spoken of what truly happened years ago. Maybe the truth had finally come to collect its debt. Nick had fallen asleep in the chair beside Noah, exhaustion overtaking his anger for the moment, but Sharon couldn't rest. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same unbearable question: was the accident really just an accident? Somewhere in another part of Genoa City, Matt was driving through the night, his expression unreadable. The city lights flickered across his face, revealing something cold, something calculated. He had seen what he came to see: Noah alive, weak, vulnerable. His return had unsettled them, just as he planned. The game was not over, it had only just begun. And as dawn approached, Sharon felt a chill creep over her as she finally admitted to herself what she had refused to believe. Matt's return wasn't about Noah's recovery, it was about unfinished business. There was something hidden, a truth buried deep enough to destroy everything if it ever surfaced. The silence of the hospital room felt suffocating again, not because of fear of loss, but because of what survival might now mean. Noah's awakening had brought life back into their family, but it had also resurrected every shadow they thought they had escaped. Whatever had happened before the crash was not over. Someone had orchestrated it. Someone had been watching. And now, with Matt back in their orbit, Sharon realized that survival was only the beginning of a much darker war. The moment Nick saw the man standing in front of him, the fragile boundary between disbelief and certainty shattered. For days, he had tried to convince himself that Sharon's fears were just trauma resurfacing, a symptom of the shock they had all endured since Noah's accident. But when he looked into Matt's eyes, or rather, into the face that had once belonged to Mitch Bacall, the man he had buried in the past, there was no denying what his instincts screamed. It wasn't resemblance or coincidence. It was him. The same sharpness in his gaze, the same arrogance masked behind a faint, mocking calm, the same slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that used to appear whenever he felt in control. Nick's breath slowed as realization settled like ice in his veins. Mitch was alive. He had changed his name, his story, his entire identity, but nothing could erase the imprint of the man who had once tried to destroy everything the Newmans held dear. And now he was standing inside the same hospital where Noah had just awakened from the brink of death. Matt, or Mitch, whichever name he was hiding behind, didn't flinch when he saw Nick's reaction. In fact, he seemed almost entertained by it, as though he had orchestrated the moment just to watch Nick unravel. His voice was calm, too calm, the tone of a man who understood the power of restraint and used it as a weapon. He spoke softly, pretending confusion, tilting his head slightly as if he couldn't comprehend why Nick's fists clenched or why Sharon's entire body tensed beside him. He tried to play the role of the misunderstood visitor, the man unfairly accused, the concerned acquaintance who had come merely to express sympathy. But his eyes betrayed him. There was a gleam there, sharp and knowing, the unmistakable glint of a predator who recognized the scent of fear. Nick, however, was not the same man he had been years ago. Time had hardened him, burned away the hesitation that once made him believe people could change simply because they claimed redemption. He had lived through too many lies, buried too many bodies of trust, to fall for that kind of performance again. He could feel Sharon trembling beside him, could sense the invisible wall of memories she was trying to keep from crumbling. Every breath she took was a silent confession of guilt, every flicker in her eyes a sign that she had known this confrontation was inevitable. The air between them thickened, tense enough to snap. Nick's voice, low and rough, broke the silence like a blade sliding from its sheath. He asked questions not to receive answers, but to expose them, questions laced with accusation, years of repressed rage condensed into each word. Who sent you here? Why now? What did you do to Noah? And every time Matt tried to respond with his rehearsed calm, Nick pushed harder, his tone sharper, his stance closer. The line between threat and warning blurred as his body leaned forward, forcing Matt to step back, his mask of composure cracking for the first time. Sharon's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. She had begged Nick to stay calm, to think before acting, but she knew it was useless. The moment he saw Mitch's face, all reason would vanish. There was too much history, too much pain tied to that man, years of betrayal, deceit, manipulation, and destruction that no apology could erase. She tried to hold Nick's arm, to steady him, but her voice came out hollow. Her mind was a storm of contradictions. She knew Matt's presence was dangerous, yet a small, reluctant part of her still feared what would happen if Nick lost control. Matt straightened, forcing a thin smile as he tried to reclaim the upper hand. He told Nick he was mistaken, that he was letting grief cloud his judgment, that not every shadow from the past was worth chasing. It was psychological warfare, subtle but lethal, and he played it with the precision of a man who had studied every weakness his opponent possessed. He shifted his tone to one of pity, suggesting that Nick was too fragile, too emotional to see reason. He even implied that Sharon's nerves were making her imagine connections that didn't exist. For a moment, he almost sounded convincing. But then Nick caught the faintest slip, a phrase, a gesture, something only Mitch would say, and that was enough to ignite him completely. The confrontation could have turned violent if Sharon hadn't stepped between them, her voice trembling as she ordered Matt to leave. Her fear wasn't only for Nick but for what might be exposed if this spiraled further. Because deep inside, Sharon carried a secret about Matt that no one else fully understood, one that could change everything if it came to light. She had tried to bury it long ago, but his sudden reappearance meant the past was no longer content to stay silent. As Matt finally turned and walked away, his expression unreadable, she felt a wave of dread that left her dizzy. Meanwhile, across the hospital, Victoria Newman stood by the window of the waiting room, staring at the faint reflection of her own anxious face against the glass. The news of Noah's awakening had brought her immense relief, but it hadn't erased the gnawing suspicion in her gut. Something about the accident didn't fit. The reports were vague, the timeline strange, and every answer seemed to lead to a new question. She remembered the night it happened, the phone call from Sharon, the chaos, the uncertainty. But what haunted her now were the inconsistencies, the unexplained tire marks, the missing surveillance footage, and the witnesses who suddenly couldn't recall what they had seen. The deeper she thought about it, the more she realized this wasn't just a tragic accident. Someone had wanted it to happen. Victoria had seen enough corporate sabotage, enough family betrayal, to recognize a setup when she saw one. And now, with Sharon's behavior becoming increasingly guarded and Nick's temper growing volatile, she knew that the truth was being kept from her. The only question was, why? She couldn't shake the image of Sharon's pale face when she mentioned Matt's name, or the tremor in her voice whenever the topic came up. Sharon was a woman haunted, and Victoria intended to find out by what. Later that afternoon, as the hospital halls grew quieter, Victoria found Sharon sitting alone outside Noah's room, her hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold herself together. Victoria approached cautiously, aware that one wrong word could send her retreating into silence. She began with small talk, concern for Noah, admiration for his strength, but her real intent was buried beneath her calm tone. She wanted to know about Matt. She wanted confirmation of the rumor that the man long thought dead was alive and walking among them. Sharon hesitated. Her eyes flickered, betraying the internal war she had fought for weeks. Admitting the truth meant reopening wounds that had barely healed, and worse, it meant acknowledging her own complicity in keeping it hidden. But Victoria's persistence left her cornered. Finally, her voice broke the silence, low and almost trembling, as she whispered what she had tried so hard to deny, that Matt Clark was alive. That he had changed his identity, inserted himself back into their world under a different name, and that she feared he had something to do with Noah's accident. Victoria's blood ran cold. It wasn't just shock that gripped her, but the awareness of what this revelation meant. Matt Clark had been one of the darkest chapters in their family's history, a manipulator who thrived on psychological destruction. If he was back, then everything they had rebuilt was in danger again. She thanked Sharon quietly, masking the dread behind professionalism, but as she walked away, her mind raced. She needed to warn Nick, to protect the family before the situation spiraled out of control. Inside Noah's room, the young man stirred again, the soft beeping of the monitor steadying. His thoughts were disjointed, fragments of memory floating like broken glass through his mind. He remembered the crash, the blinding light, the voice that called his name just before everything went black. And somewhere in that haze, he could still hear Matt, whispering something he couldn't quite recall, something that felt like both a warning and a threat. The more he tried to remember, the more his head throbbed, but one thought persisted: the accident wasn't an accident at all. Nick stood at the foot of the bed, still consumed by anger, but underneath it was fear that his family was once again the target of something bigger than they could see. He looked down at his son, at Sharon sitting silently beside him, and at the door Matt had disappeared through hours earlier. Every instinct told him that the nightmare wasn't over. Mitch Emmett, whatever name he wore now, had returned for a reason, and this time, his game was just beginning. As the night deepened, Victoria made a call to an old contact in the police department, requesting a quiet review of the accident files. Sharon sat motionless in the dark, staring at the hospital monitors, replaying every word Matt had said. And Nick, unable to sleep, stood outside under the pale glow of the parking lot lights, his thoughts spiraling between fury and guilt. The storm they thought they had escaped years ago had found them again, and the line between past and present was vanishing fast. Somewhere in the shadows of Genoa City, Matt Clark smiled to himself, his plan moving forward exactly as intended. Every piece was falling into place: Noah's accident, Sharon's panic, Nick's rage, Victoria's suspicion. He thrived on their chaos, on watching them destroy themselves trying to uncover what he had already set in motion. And as the night wind howled through the city, one truth became clear: Matt had not returned for revenge. He had returned for control.